Welcome to another episode of the Robinson-Hewitt Pod. This is where we talk about the future of technology and what it means to be human in the next era of tech. I'm your host, Alison Mackey. I'm a futurist, anthropologist of emerging technology, and founder of Robinson-Hewitt Consulting. Welcome. So last episode, we talked about the future of movies and storytelling and entertainment. And one of the actions that I left you with, if you were so inclined to want to help build the next golden era of movies, I told you to start posting the weird thing because the tools are there and the distribution is there. And there has never been a lower barrier to putting something out in the world and seeing what it will become. And after I recorded that, I kept kind of sitting with my own questioning around this of why, if we have all of this access, why aren't more people putting themselves out there? And I kept coming back to the same answer. And it's not a tools problem. It's not even a strategy problem. It's something a little bit more fundamental and a little bit more human than that. And I've been thinking about this for a very long time, and across a lot of our AI-related episodes, I have mentioned this theory that I have, and it's that artificial intelligence, as it expands in its capacity to compute things at scale, I believe that our own capacity to process, to receive, and to hold things also has to grow alongside with it. And I've noticed this pattern in founders, and these are the ones that are bringing in new ideas into the world, ideas that feel very ahead of their time. And I don't think they're being held back by lack of access to knowledge or tools. I believe they're being held back by their own system, their nervous system, their body, and the part of them that doesn't feel safe enough to be seen. And so today's episode is all about that. It's the invisible architecture underneath leadership and what it means to be a founder for the next era. So the question that is underneath this episode is, can your body hold your idea? And I think that is the real frontier, not what you know, but how much can you hold? So let's look at the current state of play when it comes to all of this. So visibility has never been more available, and it has also, in many ways, never been more threatening. And it's very strange and also really important to recognize this and to observe it as well. Because right now, anyone with a phone and internet connection can publish, broadcast, build an audience, and launch anything that they want. But the gatekeepers haven't totally disappeared from this, but their grip has loosened in many ways that would have been unimaginable even 15 years ago. And yet still brilliant people are still holding themselves back. I see people with great ideas all the time posting once and then disappearing altogether. And these ideas were once the things that keep gnawing at them and then they get shelved. And I don't think it's because of external obstacles, but something that is in the body that's saying not yet, or do something else, or something else, where their mind flips on them and tells them that they're not good enough to. And this is the paradox of the current state of play. We have built extraordinary infrastructure for ideas to travel. And we have these brilliant people, but we haven't yet built the internal infrastructure for these ideas to actually be communicated in a sustainable way. And when I look at this through an anthropological lens, it makes total sense because our nervous systems didn't evolve for this level of exposure. They evolved us to keep us safe within a tribe, to help us read social threat, to flag when we're at risk of being cast out. So standing out and being seen leaves space for being misunderstood, and it invites criticism. And all of that registers in the body as danger. And this isn't weakness. This is literally ancient and our intelligence system doing exactly what it was designed to do. But the challenge of that in today's society is that the thing that once kept us safe is now keeping us small. And in this era where the ideas that matter the most are the ones that will probably break us away from tradition, that feeling in our bodies is going to intensify. So innovation is no longer just a technical challenge, in my opinion. I believe it's also a physiological one. And I think it's one of the most underexplored conversations within the founder and leadership space of today. Because we talk endlessly about strategy, about product design, about market fit, but we never talk about whether the person leading the idea is actually able to hold it. And of course, if we want to take a glimpse into the future, we have to take a look back at time to notice the patterns. So there is this practice that has almost disappeared completely from modern life. And I think its disappearance is something that is very important about where we're at in society. And it's called convalescence. So after war, after illness, or after periods of profound exhaustion, people once understood that recovery was part of the process. It wasn't just a weekend away and not a week off during Christmas. This was an extended time where the body and mind could restore themselves before anything more could be asked of them again. So convalescence wasn't considered laziness, it was considered medicine. And this idea has fascinated me for years. So during my undergrad in anthropology, technology, my final year research was actually on the similarities between bipolar disorder and corporate culture. And one of the questions that was like underneath all of my work was, why do we celebrate relentless productivity with extraordinary performance, yet have so little tolerance when it comes to natural periods of recovery that often follow intense output? And modern organizations reward acceleration, but they rarely make space for restoration. And I recently came across a video of this woman explaining this idea in a modern context, and she made a beautiful observation. She suggested that for many of us in Western societies, the first collective experience that resembled something close to convalescence in roughly a century arrived during our lockdowns in 2020. It was when the world stopped. And even though these were devastating circumstances, it was the first time that some people ever allowed themselves to have a moment to stop and think and recover. And during this time, we saw a lot of people leave their relationships. They started businesses. They imagined different futures for themselves because for the first time in a very long time, there was space to actually hear themselves think. And I'm not romanticizing lockdown by any means, but I do think that there is something worth paying attention to in that slowing down that felt very necessary in modern times. And personally, I'm no stranger to convalescence. I've had so many periods where from the outside, it probably looks like I've completely stepped off the track of my life. But during those times, I was recovering from burnout, toxic work environments, heartbreak, and spending too long around the wrong people who made me feel like I needed to be smaller than who I actually was. Because before you can become who you're truly meant to be, you often have to mourn the version of yourself that learned to survive by shrinking. So looking back now, these seasons of my life where I've been convalescing have been the most productive of my life, even if to the outside world it looked the opposite. Because I was building the capacity for what was coming next. And sometimes the roots have to deepen before the tree can grow tall. And the Romans even have a word for this, otium. It's restorative leisure. And many of antiquity's greatest thinkers considered it essential rather than indulgent. And we have truly forgotten this. And we've become so focused on optimization that we've lost sight of integration. Because we know how to build skills. We know how to gather knowledge. But we spend far less time building the inner capacity to actually carry what we're creating. And history reflects this too. So Darwin spent years refining on the origin of species before even publishing it, knowing full well the controversy it would provoke. And Johannes Kepler as well endured years of professional uncertainty before his work fundamentally changed astronomy. And across philosophy, science, and the arts, many people who shifted civilization weren't simply the ones more intelligent than anyone else. I just think that they developed the capacity to tolerate uncertainty, criticisms, and being misunderstood for far longer than most people are comfortable with. And again, I think there's another reason for why this matters. Because human beings evolved to survive in tribes. And for most of history, standing out carries risk. Difference has always meant exile. And challenging accepted ideas could often mean persecution. Being too visible was considered dangerous. And our nervous systems have learnt those lessons over thousands of years. So today, the danger is no longer being cast out of your village. It might simply be posting an idea online or speaking up in a meeting. But our bodies don't always distinguish between those threats. The same survival system that once kept our ancestors alive can now convince us not to press publish. But there is also growing evidence that the effects of severe stress can echo across generations through both biological and social pathways. So this is whether through family systems, cultural memory, or intergenerational patterns. Many of our responses to visibility may be older than our own individual experiences. But understanding that doesn't solve the problem, but it does change the question. So instead of asking, why can't I just do it? Perhaps we can start asking, what would help my nervous system feel safe enough to do this? Because if the future belongs to people capable of holding bigger ideas, then perhaps the work isn't about forcing ourselves harder. Maybe the work is being able to expand our capacity to carry them. So where are we going in terms of the future? What are my futuristic insights telling me? So again, as AI is expanding cognitive capacity faster than anyone can keep track of, I don't think the biggest challenge moving forward is intellectual. Again, I think it's going to be emotional and physiological. So we already have access to more information than any generation before us. So we can augment our thinking, automate our processes, and accelerate almost every part of how we work. So the bottleneck isn't intelligence, it's going to be our capacity, the ability to remain functional, grounded, and generative while carrying complexity, uncertainty, criticism, change, and visibility all at the same time. Great. So the leaders and founders who will thrive in this next era won't necessarily be the ones who know the most. They're going to be the ones who can hold the most. And that is definitely a different kind of model than most of us have been raised on. So again, our nervous systems evolved to keep us physically safe. They didn't evolve to sustain us through building companies in public, sharing ideas with thousands of strangers, or building long-term visions while navigating short-term chaos. But many people are not procrastinating because they're lazy or uncommitted. I think they're experiencing the nervous system interpreting visibility as a threat. The body is just doing its job. It's just it hasn't yet been given the reason to believe the threat is survivable. And I think this expansion that AI is creating on one side is going to demand an equivalent expansion on the human side. The ability to feel safe holding bigger ideas with longer timelines and more uncertainty. Because leadership in the next era will be much more about regulation than strategy. And it's often been known that teams do actually borrow the emotional states from the people that lead them. So if we want calm, the infrastructure also needs to reflect that. And then the next level of complexity to this is about our identities. Because for decades, the cultural story has always been one of singularity. Have one career, one identity, and one trajectory. Because for most of us, we had to decide on one career path at 16 and stick to that for the next 40 years. So you become one thing and you built your entire life around that identity until you were done. But I think the future looks so much more flexible than that. And for many founders and leaders that I work with and encounter over the years, I think the fluidity is already there. So we're seeing a lot more people coming up with portfolio careers and people pursuing multiple creative avenues in their life. And we're having seasons of deep focus followed by seasons of integration. And I think reinvention is almost the design of this next era. And there's one film that kind of sticks with me with this idea, and is Wes Anderson's Darjeeling Limited. And if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it, especially if you're in a season of feeling like everything's a little bit uncertain and you're trying to figure out what comes next. So the film follows three brothers, two of whom are my celebrity crushes, guess which ones. And they're traveling across India by train after one of them survives a serious motorbike accident. And on the surface, it's a spiritual pilgrimage, but really I think it's a story about grief, identity, family, and learning how to move forward while carrying the weight of everything that's just happened. And what stayed with me with that movie when it comes to this idea of capacity isn't the story of the three brothers. I think it's a story about the train itself. Because at one point they realize that the train is lost, which is so absurd because it's on tracks. And yet somehow the train is still lost. And there's so many moments within our lives where we convince ourselves that we're off course because we don't know exactly where we're going. But I think we're not off course at all. We're probably just in between stations. So you will always have your train ticket and the tracks are always beneath you. But you'll have some stops along the way where you can get off and explore. And you'll probably make it a little bit more complicated than you need to. But then you can get back on the train. So the detours don't mean that you're failed. They just become part of the journey itself. And they shape the person who eventually arrives at the final destination with even more beautiful stories to tell. And this perfectly segues into Sylvia Plath's Fig Tree from the Bell Jar, which always seems to pop into my life right when I need the reminder to make a decision. So the main character, Esther, sits beneath the fig tree and sees her possible futures all as ripe figs. Each one are different lives and different versions of herself. And she can't choose. And because she sits in this indecision, she watches them all rot away and fall. And the tragedy isn't that there were too many options. The tragedy is that she believed that choosing one meant losing everything else. And I wonder if the future asks us to let go of that belief. Not to become everything at once, but to build the capacity to hold more than one version of ourselves across time. To become the builder and the artist, the strategist and the person who doesn't know the answer. To become the leader and the one who is still recovering. And I don't think these have to compete. I do believe that they can coexist. And that to me is something very different in leadership. Not becoming someone different, but becoming spacious enough to hold all the different contradictions without needing to resolve them all immediately. But I do believe that decisions do need to get made. So let's bring it all together into today's context. So if this is the future that we're building towards, where we have people leading who can hold complexity and can be visible without collapsing in on themselves, how do we get there? So for individuals, this is my ask today. The first place to start with is to question what is actually in the way, because it is rarely what it looks like on the surface. The person who cannot bring themselves to post isn't being lazy. I think the founder who keeps refining the idea instead of posting it is not being perfect rejectionist. There is something in the body that is reading the situation as unsafe. And until that gets addressed, more strategy isn't going to move things. So a useful starting point is to notice where you are dimming yourself. The moments where you're apologizing for taking up space, where you edit something before anyone has even responded, or where you choose a safer version of what you want to say. Because there's something underneath all of that that I think is worth examining. And there's something I want to say about visibility wounds, because I think they're more common and more deep-rooted than most of us give acknowledgement to. Because for many people, the fear of being seen is not just personal history, but also ancestral. So communities that were persecuted for their beliefs, for being different, and for their own personal power, that history within us just doesn't disappear overnight. It moves through generations, and it shows up as an instinct to stay quiet, to make yourself palatable, and to shrink before someone can even ask you to. So recognizing that the fear may not entirely be yours to carry isn't about avoiding accountability, but I think it's about acknowledging a part of you that belongs to a longer conversation, something that's been passed down for generations. So there's also another part of this of giving yourself the freedom to be the first in your generation to break the cycle. And for founders and builders, I want to bring in a very quick reference to Anna Wintour. So during her time at Vogue, she was known to reply to emails within 15 minutes. And every decision she made it quickly. She left no room for second guessing. And I've thought about that a lot in relation to this idea of the mind and body coherence. Because what she had, what most decisiveness at that level requires, it's the absence of internal conflict. So when your thoughts and when your body are in alignment, decisions can come to you faster because you're not arguing with yourself. And I always say this to founders and leaders: you are the expert in your idea, so trust it. Learn to know what's in your body, what is a yes and what is a no. And if you're wrong, you'll learn from it. It's okay. We all make mistakes. And another practice I think is really useful before even asking how to build something is asking, can you hold it? Can your body sustain the energy that is required by this idea? Not permanently, of course, but able to grow into it. So are you building from a place of conviction, or are you building from a place of proving something? And the two can feel very similar, but they're very different on the inside. And making sure that you know the distinction between the two is very important. And one more thing for founders is that the visibility that comes with building in public isn't separate from the work itself. I do believe it's part of it, because the idea of building an audience will expose to you who you already are. And I don't believe it changes it. I just think it amplifies it. So building an audience and having eyes on you will amplify more of who you actually are. And it gives you more resources to do more of what you are already doing. Which means the question of who you are being before the attention arrives upon you is the most important question. And our actions for organizations. So if the bottleneck to good ideas coming into this world is no longer an access to tools or information, but about human capacity, then organizations will have a genuine interest in nervous system and health. And I don't see this as a wellness initiative or another way to optimize something, but as an infrastructure decision. So teams that function at an emotional level around the people leading them. So a leader who is dysregulated, burnt out, or operating from fear can create a field that others are working inside of. And people can tell if someone is inhibiting confidence versus performing it. People can tell when decisions are coming from conviction versus anxiety, and they adjust their behavior accordingly. So creating conditions for people to recover properly, to make decisions without excessive second guessing, and to have the space to create creative risks without fear of exile. I don't think those are soft outcomes, but I do believe that they are conditions for where the best ideas are going to get built for the next era. So, can your body hold your idea? I think it's one of the most important questions any leader or founder can ask themselves right now. And this is not to put your ideas on pause, but I do think it is a great moment to kind of reorientate your development. Because I don't think a vision can limit you, but your capacity will. But our capacity is something that can be trained, expanded, and tended to. And there is a part 2 to this conversation that I'm already working on, which is about the kind of leaders and organizations that will actually thrive structurally in the next era. So if today was about becoming the person who can carry ideas, next week is going to be about what forms leadership and collaboration that it demands. So, if today's episode got you thinking, you can come and join your journey with us. We post nearly every day on Instagram, sharing our daily insights and inspirations for founders and future facing leaders. It's a good place to stay curious. And if you're ready to go deeper, you can head over to our website at RobinsonHewitt.com. We work at the intersection of anthropology, emerging technology, and future systems thinking, helping future facing leaders, founders, and businesses transform, evolve, and build the next era. If you're still orienting, we have a lot of free resources available on our website online to help you with your own founder's journey. But if you're ready to take the leap, you can check out our services as well. Make sure to subscribe to next week's episode to help build a better future for everybody. Everything is linked below, and I will see you in the next one. Ciao.